My name is Kevin Owocki. I have a bachelor's degree in computer science from 2006. Spent 10 or 15 years in Web2, building Web2 startups. And then in 2017, I've co-founded Gitcoin. Has anyone heard of Gitcoin? All right, a little rolling laughter in the audience. And then also greenpill.network in 2021, a podcast about how we can use crypto for regen. Has anyone listened to the podcast at all in the audience? A few of you. Amazing. Well, and then I also shitpost as Owocki on Twitter, sometimes about public goods, and then sometimes I'm just shitposting. So hopefully no one takes those posts too seriously. My talk today is how to create an attractor for public goods funding. So this will be a vision talk about attractors, which are basically this idea that you can design psychological incentive mechanisms to shift the world's agents, which are humans and eventually AI, towards more public goods funding. And my formula for the talk is, if you don't understand what I'm talking about, at least we have cool visuals behind me designed by my designer Octavian, who's really amazing. So we're going to talk about what are attractors first, and then I'm going to talk about building a public goods attractor, primarily aiming towards talking about my experience at Gitcoin and how that has evolved over time. And then we're going to finish from there. If we have time, I could talk maybe about creating more strong and stable attractors for public goods funding, and an attractor for more attractors for public goods funding, which is like the meta ending for this talk. And then let's see, it's 11:34 right now. How am I doing on time? I have like 18 minutes left or something? 55? Okay, so I've got 20 more minutes. Alrighty, so what is an attractor? In the field of dynamic systems, complex systems, an attractor is a set of states through which a system tends to evolve. Human political economies are a subsection of economic systems, which are a subsection of complex systems, which is basically a long way of saying that you can't really model the behavior the same way you could a physical system, because it's agent-based. People are making different decisions, and sometimes they're rational, sometimes they're irrational. But what we want to do is create attractors in these complex systems towards the things that we want. Around the attractor, there is this idea of a basin of attraction. And so a basin of attraction is just the region of the phase space around an attractor where people will be drawn into that phase space. So as objects fall into the basin of attraction, they're naturally drawn towards the attractors, or there's unattractors that can pull you away from points in the system that are unattractive. And so like a really easy physical example of a basin of attraction is mini golf. Has anyone in the audience played mini golf? Okay, cool. I didn't know if it was just like an American thing, but gravity pulls the ball down the well and into a hole. And then there's also basins of unattraction, which if you've ever played a mini golf hole that has something like this, particularly if you've ever taken your kids to a basin of unattraction, it can be a frustrating thing. But attractors are not just physical systems. You can also have psychological attractors. So the ultimate, I'm from Colorado, Shill, Colorado, ETH Denver, come next year, it's gonna be awesome. The ultimate Colorado example of an attractor is the good vibes and the warmth and the friendship and maybe like guitar and music that you would get around a campfire. So agents that are going camping with you, your friends, are gonna go gather around the campfire at night if you're camping together in Colorado. And that's an example of a psychological attractor. A maybe more French example of an attractor is these street musicians that I saw yesterday. And they were playing this really beautiful music on a street corner, and you could just tell that people were captivated by that and were hanging out in the cafe and attracted to that area. A more degen example of an attractor is maybe people who are surfing YouTube and have a profit motive, and they see this video that looks very clickbaity, Bitcoin price explosion, which I find to be pretty funny, because YouTube is covered with these clickbaity YouTube videos that are attractors for people who have a profit motive, and people are pulled into crypto by this profit motive. And I think it's just funny how the algorithm has optimized people for these like clickbaity videos, but it's also the narrative behind the video, right? The narrative that you might hear about Michael Saylor is that he's a really successful CEO and he's buying Bitcoin. What does he know that I don't know? That's the psychological attractor that is a degen example of an attractor. But there's this attribute that attractors can have in which you've got a stable attractor, which is like a set of directions through which agents will evolve their behavior. But then there's also unstable attractors. And I think that like shitcoin pumps on YouTube or like pump and dumps, like clickbaits on YouTube are an example of an unstable attractor because they generate this dynamics where everyone buys and then and then they get dumped on and then the market's in a bear market for forever. So there's stable attractors and then there's unstable attractors. There's also attractors that are not just fixed point attractors. So a point attractor is the most simple example of an attractor in a complex system. But there's also limit cycle attractors, which are basically, they go around in a circle. And then limit torus, which are like the attractor system will orbit around a fixed point, but it'll fluctuate over time, which creates more of like a spherical type of shape. And then what I think is one of the most fascinating types of attractors out there is called a chaotic attractor or a strange attractor, which doesn't follow any fixed type of pattern, but the agents in the system still stay in the system, right? So one of the sort of like criteria for creating an attractor is that the agents in the system stay in the system, they don't spin off and go and do something else. All right, so that's attractors. That's more than you probably ever wanted to know about attractors, but I just think that they're this cool set of things in complex systems that we can maybe sort of leverage in order to think about building an attractor for public goods funding. How do we build multiple strong, stable attractors that fund public goods and shift the incentives of people in the world towards contributing to public goods? So we've got an optimization function in this fitness landscape, in this search space, in which we're trying to deploy mechanisms and memes and anything else that we can that helps us reach our global maxima of how much can we fund public goods, how much can we make sure that the commons are funded. And if we hit this state, then we're going to reach a world in which people can volunteer in their communities and they can be involved in creating public goods in their communities and they can be adequately rewarded for the work that they're doing in their communities. And that's why we want to create an attractor for public goods. One of the things I think is really cool about Web3 is that we now have programmable protocols that we can imbue, we can chisel into a global corruption-resistant programmable state and execution machine. And they can run free forever without intermediaries. So a generation ago, you might be like, people were entrepreneurial minded and we're trying to build infrastructure, we're building physical infrastructure, they're building roads and bridges and adding things to skylines. We are chiseling our values into decentralized digital systems, immutable code, and we're building hyperstructures, which I think are a much more stable foundation for an attractor because we've now got digital systems that are global and programmable and capture resistant and transparent, that we can build these hyperstructures, we can build more stable attractors for public goods funding that will form the infrastructure in our digital age. And that makes me really excited to think about building mechanisms for public goods, of which there are many. I'm excited about Octant, I'm excited about Giveth, I'm excited about CLR Fund, I'm excited about all the public goods things, hypercerts. If I didn't name drop you, I'm still excited about what you're doing. Keep up the great work, build a public goods attractor. But I'm gonna talk about Gitcoin because it's the one that I understand as the founder of Gitcoin that has been involved in building it for the last 6 years. So basically, what we've been trying to do with Gitcoin over the last 6 years is build an attractor for public goods funding. So basically, there are these two products, Gitcoin Grant Stack, which is a web interface for interacting with Allo protocol, which is short for allocation protocol. And that exports quadratic funding mechanisms right now, but eventually could cover the surface of all different allocation mechanisms and is exporting $2 to $5 million per quarter in funding for the Web3 ecosystem. Can I get a hand for the Gitcoin team who has just rebuilt Gitcoin grants from the ground up to be decentralized? Yeah. All right. If you were involved in building Grant Stack or Allo, keep up the great work. I think that it's really neat to see. But along the way, we have discovered a couple different Achilles heels with quadratic funding and with Gitcoin that have led us to kind of create side quest attractors to the ecosystem. So in the main quest of trying to create more public goods funding, we discovered that quadratic funding, which is the mechanism behind Gitcoin, has a Achilles heel to it, which is quadratic funding basically optimizes for the preferences of the poor and the many over top of the rich and the few. And because of that, in a rational economic ecosystem, you have a incentive to what's called Sybil attack the system. Sybil attacks means creating sock puppet accounts. And so, you know, imagine you're me in 2020, you've got quadratic funding, Gitcoin's growing 50% month over month, Vitalik's blogging about you, and people are like, congrats on Gitcoin, Kevin, but you're like, in the back of your mind, you know, oh fuck, we have to solve this Sybil problem now. And so that was the genesis of Gitcoin Passport, which is basically a way that you can verify your identity on a bunch of different blockchain networks, and it's privacy preserving, but it also allows the system to have assurances that you don't have Sybil attacks anymore. And so the second attractor that was built at Gitcoin to solve this Achilles heel is called Gitcoin Passport. And I'm really excited about not only preventing Gitcoin from Sybil attacks, but in a lot of my time at Gitcoin, I kept on talking to other founders that were getting sock puppet attacked in their networks, and they're like, yo, Kevin, break off a piece of that Sybil resistance for me. And so now Passport's a permissionless protocol, a hyperstructure for preventing Sybil attacks. And it doesn't really fully protect against all Sybil attacks, but I think it is a good foundation for advancing the state of anti-Sybil in the ecosystem in a pluralistic and value-aligned way. And then the other attractor that we've had to sort of engineer for the other Achilles heel at Gitcoin was the fact that you always need to be topping up the matching pool. So we've experimented with a lot of different things for getting the matching pool continuously funded. Rounds 1 through 7 were funded by the Ethereum Foundation and Vitalik. And then during NFT summer, we had a couple of NFT launches. Shout out to the Moonshot Bots holders in the audience, if you're out there. Okay, yeah, thanks, Stephen. And now Gitcoin just launched publicgoods.network, which is gonna be a layer 2 where part of the sequencer fees are gonna be given to public goods. And I'm really excited to see what we can do with funding public goods in a recurring and legitimate way for the ecosystem. And then, of course, there's many other experiments out there. Gitcoin has been a participant in Optimism retroactive public goods funding with Octant, who just spoke, and a handful of other ways of shoring up the matching pool. So these are all the attractors that we've had to stack over the last 6 years in order to build a public goods hyperstructure on the Ethereum blockchain. And it's been an exercise in complexity and sprawling scope, but if you want to build a stable attractor, then that's been the solution, is to stack these attractors. So one of my favorite shit posts to put out there right now is this idea that your DAO is a strange attractor, which is, you know, for anyone who's involved in DAOs, you know that the ground is always shifting and the political economy is always evolving, and the protocols that are being deployed by these DAOs can sometimes you have to iterate towards success, I guess is the generous way to say it. But visualizing it in the field of dynamic systems as an attractor and its evolution as it grows over time, I think has been a lot of fun for me and has helped me think about this object that we're building, which is a public goods attractor. So the good news is that if your DAO is a strange attractor, which remember is an attractor where you don't exactly know where things are in the system, that there's a way to unbundle that strange attractor, that chaotic attractor, into multiple different layers, right? Before we went to an exercise of stacking GrantStack and Passport and public goods network all together, and you know, you can decouple that into the different composite protocols that have been shipped by your project, and then the political economy around it, which is probably the more complex part of having a DAO. And I think you can stack these attractors, but you can also unstack the attractors if you need to work with them in their modular parts. So I want to talk about the Allo protocol, the allocation protocol, which I've been working on with people at Gitcoin on the Gitcoin core devs. And I want to reason about some of the attributes of what I think the strongest possible attractor for public goods funding coordination mechanisms could be. So I think that you would want it to have maximal stability, and I think the fact that this is a hyperstructure built on top of the EVM and permissionless decentralized global code is one of those attributes. You want to have maximum amount of money going into the system, right? So you want to maximize the amount of funding that could be deployed through the system. You want to maximize the amount of data about the projects being funded into this allocation computer that you're building, because the more data that you have is going to allow you to build better coordination mechanisms for distributing, for allocating that fund into the community. So when I talk about maximum, I'm talking not only about the maximum depth of funding and data and coordination mechanisms, but I'm also talking about the maximum agility of coordination mechanisms. What are the ways that we can build the most beautiful and elegant ways of allocating capital into these ecosystems? And so Allo protocol, it has oriented itself around a couple different subcomponents, and I want to sort of explore the design space of what's going to be built on top of Allo over the next 3 or 4 years here. Right now, Gitcoin's known as quadratic funding, and quadratic funding I think we think of as like the first app on this allocation protocol that we're building, kind of like when you used Windows XP is shipped with Minesweeper and Solitaire. Quadratic funding is the first app on top of the Allo protocol. So the Allo protocol needs to have aqueducts, it needs to ingest funding, it needs to have a registry of information about who you're allocating to, data, and then it needs to have allocation and distribution strategies for funding, okay? So if you wanted to have a maximally agile set of aqueducts, then you would build it such that you could put in, it would be compatible with all the different funding ingestion mechanisms out there, DAO treasuries, passing proposals to go into aqueducts, 0x splits, radical drips. Been talking to the Superfluid team about exploring the design space of all of the different funding sources that you could put funding into an allocation protocol. All right, next we want to, again, have maximal data ingestion into the protocol. And so Allo has its own registry of grants, which is what you'll use out of the box with Gitcoin grants in the future. But there are other registries out there of information of projects that matter out there that need funding. And so you can wrap up hypercerts or Ethereum attestation services or the Optimism retroactive public goods funding, or the whole design space of data sources for what could be worth funding within your ecosystem and ingest it into Allo, okay? So we're building the maximally effective coordination mechanism, or machine, computer, by ingesting the most data and the most funding into it. And then this is where things get really fun. You have maximal data and you have maximal capital coming into that attractor, then you can start to explore the design space of different coordination mechanisms out there. And right now, Gitcoin's known for quadratic funding. But what if we built cluster mapping quadratic funding and Macy quadratic funding and direct grants and conviction voting and assurance contracts? And I just think that there's this whole design space of coordination mechanisms that once you have the data and once you have the funding, you can start to build all these beautiful ways of allocating capital to public goods funding. So I think that this is like sort of my build around how are we going to build the maximally strong public goods attractor on top of a stable foundation of EVM-based blockchains over the next couple of years. And the idea is to build something that's maximally powerful and maximally agile, but the idea is also to do it in such a way that it's easy to use. And so it exists. You can go to manager.gitcoin.co and you can run a quadratic funding round in a couple of clicks now. So we've taken everything that the Ethereum Foundation and Vitalik used in order to build their ecosystem with Gitcoin grants in the last market cycle, and we've bottled it up at manager.gitcoin.co, which has been no small feat, but you just go to manager.gitcoin.co, you create a round, you give it a name, you tell people where they need to go for support, you give it some dates through which you can apply to the round and the crowdfunding actually happens, and then you set some parameters. In this case, I'm creating a 10 ETH round on manager.gitcoin.co, and then I'm setting a matching cap and a donation threshold, and then setting eligibility criteria, and then all of a sudden, voila, anyone can deploy a quadratic funding round. I see a couple of Gitcoin people in the back. Can I get a hand for Gitcoin for building all of this? Yay! I just think it's been no small feat to take quadratic funding and put it into a thing that anyone can now run a quadratic funding round. And I'm excited about a world in which we have these attractors for public goods funding. And we have ecosystems that need to fund their public goods, which basically means that you distribute value in your ecosystem to the highest value people out there. I'm not talking about just the airdrop farmers or the people who can apply to grants and go through your grueling grants process. I'm talking about building the ultimate public goods attractor that's going to allow you to measure what matters in your ecosystem, then fund what matters in your ecosystem. And then we're going to stack them all on top of each other. Every DAO, every L2, every NFT project is going to have allocation protocols. Some of them will use Gitcoin, some of them will use Giveth, some of them will use CLR Fund. And for you sitting in the middle of this stack of attractors contributing to lots of public goods, you're going to start getting income from all of them. This is going to get to the level that we're going to be able to replace people's salaries with contributing to public goods and then paying for their public goods from there. And that's the vision, is to shift the phase space to create an attractor for public goods funding where anyone can quit their job and just work on the public good and then get token economic rewards allocated to them for that. Oh, and the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to dole them out over time, because turns out people have real world commitments. They got to pay mortgages, you got to pay for your kids' school, you got to fly to ECC and come out to France. So you got to dole it out over time to build trust with these ecosystems that you're going to continue to fund public goods and that you're going to continue to get token economic rewards for working on public goods. So we just created many basins of attraction for funding public goods. We got some pretty pictures to look at while we did it, and we enmeshed it into the future economic substrate, the EVM, as a hyperstructure. So this is a stable attractor for public goods funding, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you create an attractor for public goods funding. Thanks for coming. Oh, I'm told that I should do a Q&A, so let's do it. If people have questions, let me know. How much time do we have? A couple minutes. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. If no one asks questions, I'm going to have to show you more shiny objects. So, or if it comes back up on screen.
We have one.
Oh, okay. Hello.
Bonjour. Thanks for that
Bonjour,
awesome. Thanks for that awesome presentation, Owocki. Is your vision encompassing even so far as like government funding? Like, for example, there's a fund that's just been announced by the U.S. government. That's a $7 billion fund called Solar for All, and I'm thinking like just the massive coordination efforts that they're now undertaking to try to give away $7 billion that's actually earmarked for underserved communities in the U.S. to be able to access, for the first time in their lives, solar technology. How can we interface some of what you're putting forth here with normie land?
Yeah. Normie land. What's that? Well, so my first thing that I've been working on is we've been working on a quadratic funding tool that works like if you don't care about blockchain at all, and it's called simplegrants.xyz. And so this is a project that I've been working on where you just you put in Stripe keys and you can accept US dollars. It kind of works. Pia Mancini's somewhere in the audience, and her and I have done some quadratic funding rounds for traditional open source software. I can't see you out here. There she is. Okay, yeah. And so I think that there's like a little bit of I call this Gitcoin's DVD by mail strategy, where it's like when they started Netflix, they knew that they wanted to go to online streaming, but the world wasn't there yet, so they launched a DVD by mail service, and then after 5 or 10 years, they had to move most of the revenue over to streaming from there. And I think of building quadratic funding tools for the fiat ecosystem is kind of like Gitcoin's DVD by mail strategy. But I think that eventually, hopefully if you guys can solve all the onboarding and UX issues with blockchain, we can do this faster. So that's my challenge to everyone out there. I think eventually we'll get there. But I guess this is all a long way of saying, yeah, not really, not yet. I I mean, the whole world hates crypto right now. Let's just say it. And so it's going to be a long road, I think, to getting more of this capital allocated in these systems. But we can prove bit by bit that we can legitimately allocate capital well in our own ecosystem. And then I think we can make the jump to trying to get government funds from there. So maybe not the answer that everyone wanted to hear, but I think that's the truthful answer. Good question. And oh, by the way, it breaks my heart to see like all these like government funds going out during COVID, and they just get captured by the people who are best at capturing the funds, not the people who actually need it the most. Like that's just heartbreaking to me in the meantime. So I think the faster we can solve these capital allocation problems, the better. But first, it starts with doing it ourselves. Great question. Is there another question? Hi, Matt.
I'll plug that. If you were somebody who just joined the Fund in the Commons community, or this is your first Fund in the Commons, and you're getting up to speed in public goods, what is like the project that you would like to see a new builder take on, or like a couple projects that you think are super exciting that you would like to see build?
Yeah, I think that there's just such a rich design space here between hypercerts and Macy quadratic funding and superfluid streams and retro PGF. I think that I would just learn about all the different primitives that exist out there. You know, I just shilled Gitcoin Passport and Gitcoin's Allo protocol out there. So I would just learn about all the APIs, and then like, it's like we're creating regen money Legos, and then I would just figure out what you want to build with them on top of that. So like, you know, that's what you could do if you're thoughtful. If you just want a shortcut, just go to Gitcoin and build on top of Gitcoin's protocols. Thanks, Matt. I'm going to tweet out a link to these talks. So if you like shiny objects, go to my Twitter and you can get a copy of my talk there. Thank you to the Funding the Commons team for putting on this great stage. I really enjoyed giving my talk, and I'll see you all out in the courtyard. Peace and love.
You can also do probably one more question.
Okay. Evan tells me I could do one more question before before Juan. Wow, I'm opening for Juan Benet. Holy crap! What's up, Juan? How you doing?
More like I'm pulling.
Yeah. All right, I don't see any hands raised. So
Okay, I have a question.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Hey, Kevin, it's Addie.
Oh, hey, Eddie, what's up?
So one of the main issues that we've run into trying to fund crypto-based public goods is that they don't necessarily want to receive crypto as a payment. Is there anything that you found to address that kind of discrepancy between building on cryptographic primitives versus actually like deploying capital on them?
Yeah, wait, so you've got people in crypto ecosystems working on crypto public goods that don't want to receive crypto?
Yeah, like the majority of the time,
That's a real knot.
if I'm being honest. Because there's either like a disconnect on the TradFi side where what we're seeing is that people don't want to deal with the implications of KYC and onboarding and offboarding of fiat and the
Yeah.
discrepancy and kind of turmoil in the token-based pricing.
Yeah. Yeah, those are all fair criticisms. I ran a quadratic funding round for MetaCamp, which is this community of DAO nerds that I went to. And one of the things that we wanted to do for that was like pay the house cleaners and the bartenders and everyone through quadratic funding. And we just like gave the tokens to one of our crypto friends and we just paid them all out in cash, which I think was like a better user experience for them because, you know, they don't have to fuck with setting up a wallet or any of that kind of stuff. And like, I think there's a difference between like giving people crypto because you want to market crypto to them versus just like giving them money because it's good for them. And at a small scale, we were like the off-ramp for them, but I don't know how you solve that at scale without off-ramps in every territory. So again, I don't have an answer that anyone wants to hear, but that's the real answer, I think. All right, I'm gonna make my third exit. Thank you so much. Peace and love. Enjoy Juan Benet.